It's
The
all
moment
right
my
here in
daughter
black and
looked
white.
me in the eye and said, "You've
We
already lost
trusted you.
everything,
How could you
Mom,"
betray the family like this?
something inside me went quiet.
These
They were
statements
standing in my
don't
living
lie.
room,
$40,000 is missing,
discussing
and I want to
selling
know
my house,
exactly where
dividing
it
what
went
little was
before I
left,
call the
as
police.
if I wasn't even there. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. Because while they believed I was broke, helpless, finished, they never checked the second account. And that was their first mistake. If you've ever felt betrayed by the people you trusted most, I'd really like to hear your story. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this kind of story speaks to you, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes sharing even a small detail makes us feel a little less alone. Before everything fell apart, I used to believe I had built something unbreakable. My name is Alice Emerson. I'm 62 years old, and for most of my life, I prided myself on two things: my independence and my family. I owned a small antique and home decor shop in a quiet town just outside Asheville, North Carolina. It wasn't the kind of business that made headlines, but it was steady, reliable. People came in not just to buy things, but to talk, to reminisce, to feel something familiar in a world that was changing too fast. I knew most of my customers by name. Some of them had been coming in for over 20 years. That shop was my life after my husband Robert passed away. Robert had been the practical one, the cautious one, the kind of man who read every line of every contract and still didn't trust it. When he died, I remember feeling like someone had quietly removed the foundation beneath my feet. But I didn't fall. I kept the business running. I paid off what needed to be paid. I made sure my children never felt the full weight of that loss. At least, that's what I thought. My daughter, Diane Carter, was always strong-willed. Even as a little girl, she had a way of asking questions that felt less like curiosity and more like calculation. "How much is this worth, Mom? Who's going to get the house one day? Do you have a will yet?" Back then, I used to laugh it off. "That's not something you need to worry about," I'd tell her gently. But Diane never forgot those answers. She just stored them somewhere, like she did everything else. As she got older, that sharpness only grew. She built a career in real estate, and she was good at it, very good. Confident, persuasive. The kind of person who could walk into a room and make people feel like they were already behind if they didn't listen to her. I used to admire that about her. Now I wonder if I misunderstood it. My son, Jason Emerson, was different. He was quieter, softer. The kind of child who would sit beside me in the shop, polishing old silverware or carefully wrapping fragile glass pieces, asking me stories about where they came from. He didn't ask about money. He asked about meaning. At least, he used to. Jason never had the same drive Diane did. He moved from job to job for a while. Nothing terrible, just nothing lasting. Eventually, he settled into a modest position at a local logistics company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. He stayed close to home both physically and emotionally. Or so I believed. Looking back now, I realized something I didn't want to see. Then Jason didn't make decisions. He followed them. And more often than not, he followed Diane. Still, for years, we were a family. We had Sunday dinners, Thanksgiving at my house, Christmas mornings that still carried echoes of when the kids were little. There was laughter, there were small disagreements, but nothing that ever made me question the core of what we had. I trusted them, completely. And maybe that was my first mistake. There was something Robert used to say, something that didn't make much sense to me at the time. "Trust is a beautiful thing, Alice," he told me once, sitting at our kitchen table late one night. "But it shouldn't be blind." I remember smiling at him, teasing. "You think our children would ever take advantage of us?" He didn't smile back. "I think people are capable of more than we want to believe," he said quietly, "especially when fear or money gets involved." I didn't like that answer. It felt too cynical, too heavy, so I dismissed it. "Not our kids," I said. "We raised them better than that." Robert didn't argue. He rarely did when he knew my mind was made up. But a few weeks later, he sat me down with a stack of papers and said something that would come back to me years later in a way I never expected. Just in case, he told me, "I want you to open a separate account. Something quiet, something safe." I frowned at him. "Why, we already have savings." He shook his head gently. "This isn't about savings, it's about security. For you." I remember feeling almost offended. "Are you saying I can't trust my own family?" "No," he said calmly. "I'm saying you shouldn't have to depend on anyone's goodness to survive. Not even mine." I didn't fully understand him then, but I trusted him. So I did what he asked. I opened the account, and then I forgot about it. Or at least I told myself I did. Life went on. Years passed. The shop grew a little, then plateaued, then settled into a rhythm that felt comfortable. Diane became more successful. Jason remained steady. We continued our traditions. From the outside, everything looked fine. But there were small moments, tiny cracks that I ignored. Diane asking again. "So, what's the house worth now?" Jason glancing at her before answering simple questions. The way conversations about the future always seemed to circle back to assets, to ownership, to what would happen one day. I told myself it was normal. People plan. Families discuss these things. But there was a difference between planning and anticipating. And sometimes, when I looked at Diane's eyes, when she talked about these things, I didn't see concern. I saw expectation. Still, I never imagined it would come to this. I never imagined sitting in my own living room, listening to my children speak about me like I was already gone. Because back then, before the money disappeared, before the tone of their voices changed, I believed I was safe. I believed love was enough. And I believed that everything I had built, my business, my home, my family, would hold together, no matter what. I was wrong. I just didn't know it yet. The day I lost everything didn't feel dramatic at first. There was no thunder, no warning sirens, no moment where the world stopped spinning. It was just an email. I remember it clearly because I was standing behind the counter in my shop, wrapping a set of vintage porcelain plates for a regular customer. The late afternoon sun was coming through the front window, casting that soft golden light I always loved. Everything felt ordinary, safe. Then my phone buzzed. At first, I almost ignored it. Business hours were sacred to me. But some quiet instinct, made me pick it up. The subject line read, "Urgent Project Status Update." My stomach tightened. The investment. I had nearly forgotten about it in the rush of daily life, but now the word urgent pulled everything back into focus. A few months earlier, my friend Helen Brooks had introduced me to an opportunity. It wasn't something I would normally consider, real estate development outside my usual comfort zone, but Helen had known me for over 30 years. I trusted her, and the man behind the project, a polished, confident developer named Charles Whitaker, had seemed legitimate. He spoke with certainty. He showed projections, charts, timelines. He made it sound less like a risk and more like a carefully planned step forward. "It's not speculation," he had told me during one of our meetings. "It's growth." I remember hesitating. Robert's voice echoed faintly in the back of my mind. But then I thought about the shop, about Diane always saying I should expand, scale up. Stop thinking small. Maybe this was my chance. So I invested. Not everything, but enough that it mattered. And now I stood there, holding my phone, reading words that didn't make sense at first. Unexpected market conditions, funding complications, temporary suspension. My eyes moved faster, my breathing shallower. Then I saw it. "We regret to inform you that the project has entered insolvency proceedings." I don't remember finishing the email. I don't remember what I told the customer. All I remember is the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and uneven, echoing in my ears as the world around me blurred. Insolvency. The word felt foreign. Heavy. Final. It took hours, phone calls, more emails, frantic attempts to understand, but by the end of that day, the truth became clear. The project had collapsed. The funds were gone. Not temporarily tied up, not delayed. Gone. I sat alone in the shop long after closing, staring at the ledger on my desk, trying to piece together what was left. My main account, the one I used for everything, the one tied to the business, the house, my daily life, had taken the full hit. Years of careful saving, years of work, reduced to numbers that suddenly looked fragile. I remember whispering to myself, "This can't be right." But it was. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept going over every detail, every conversation, every decision. I replayed Charles Whitaker's confident voice in my head, searching for cracks I had missed. I thought about Helen, how certain she had sounded, how excited. Had she known, or had she trusted him the same way I had? By morning, one thing was clear: I couldn't keep this from my children. Not because I wanted their help, but because this would affect everything. The house, the shop, my future, and whether I liked it or not, their expectations. I invited Diane and Jason over that evening. I told myself to stay calm, to present the facts clearly, to trust that no matter what they would stand by me, because that's what family does. Right Diane arrived first, as she always did, sharp, composed, already halfway into a conversation before she even sat down. "What's going on?" she asked, placing her purse neatly on the table. "You sounded serious." Jason came a few minutes later, quieter, offering me a small, concerned smile. "Everything okay, Mom?" I took a breath. "No," I said honestly. "It's not." I explained everything. The investment, the collapse, the loss. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't cry. I simply laid it out the way I would explain a damaged piece of furniture, clearly, carefully, hoping it could still be understood. For a moment, there was silence. Then Diane spoke. "How much?" she asked. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What can we do?" Just how much. I told her. Her expression didn't change much. If anything, it sharpened. "And your main account," she pressed. "Most of it was there," I admitted. Jason shifted in his seat. "That's a lot, Mom," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. Another pause. I waited. I expected concern, maybe even reassurance. Something that sounded like we were still a unit, still a family, facing a problem together. Instead, Diane leaned back slightly, crossing her arms. "Well," she said, her tone measured, "we need to start thinking about what's left." The words landed harder than I expected. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean," she continued, already slipping into that familiar businesslike cadence, "we need to assess your assets. The house, the shop, anything that can be stabilized before things get worse." Jason didn't interrupt. He didn't disagree. He just looked down at his hands. "I'm not bankrupt," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've taken a loss, yes, but I'm not ruined." Diane gave me a look I couldn't quite read. "Mom," she said gently, but there was something underneath it, something cold. "This is serious. You can't afford to be optimistic right now." Optimistic, that's what she called it. I felt something shift in my chest then. Something small, but unmistakable. Not yet pain. Not yet betrayal. Just distance. I just wanted you to know, I said quietly. We'll figure it out. Diane nodded, but her eyes had already moved on to calculations, to possibilities, to outcomes that didn't seem to include me in the way I had imagined. Jason gave me a brief, uncertain smile. Yeah, he said. We'll figure it out. But as they left that night, I stood in the doorway watching them walk to their cars, and for the first time, I felt something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear of losing money. It was the unsettling realization that I might be losing something else. Something I had always believed was unshakable. And I didn't yet know how much that would cost me. At first, the change was subtle. So subtle, in fact, that I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. The morning after I told Diane and Jason about the loss, I woke up earlier than usual. Sleep had been restless, broken into fragments by numbers and questions that refused to settle. Still, I made my coffee, stood by the kitchen window, and tried to gather myself the way I always did. Routine had always been my anchor, but that morning, something felt off. It started with Diane. She called me before 9 o'clock, which wasn't unusual, but the tone of her voice was. Mom, she said briskly, skipping any greeting, I'm coming by later. We need to go over your documents. Documents, I repeated. Yes, financial records, property deeds, anything related to the house and the shop. We need a clear picture of what you're dealing with, what I'm dealing with. Not what we're dealing with. I can handle that, I said carefully. There's no rush. There was a brief pause on the other end. Then Diane exhaled like someone trying to remain patient. Mom, this is exactly the kind of thinking that got you into this situation. We don't have the luxury of taking things slowly. The words stung more than I expected. I made one mistake, I said quietly. You made a big mistake. Mom? This is exactly the kind of thinking that got you into this situation. We don't have the luxury of taking things slowly. The words stung more than I expected. I made one mistake, I said quietly. You made a big mistake. She corrected her tone, still controlled, still professional. And now we need to fix it. But again, it didn't feel like we. It felt like she had already stepped into a role I hadn't given her permission to take. I'll be there at 2, she added. Please have everything ready. And just like that, the call ended. I stood there for a long moment, the silence in the kitchen pressing in around me. I told myself she was just worried, that this was her way of helping, but something about it felt less like concern and more like control. Jason didn't call that morning. He didn't text. He didn't stop by. And that somehow felt even louder. By the time Diane arrived, I had gathered what she asked for: folders, statements, property records, everything neatly arranged on the dining table. She walked in without her usual warmth, barely glancing around the house. Good, she said, seeing the papers. Let's get started. No hug. No, how are you holding up? Just business. She sat down, flipping through the documents with quick, practiced movements. I watched her silently, noticing the way her eyes scanned each page, not with emotion, but with evaluation. Numbers, value, risk. At one point, she paused, tapping her finger against a statement. This account is almost drained, she said. Yes, I replied. That's where the investment came from. And this one, she asked, pointing to another. Operating funds for the shop. She frowned slightly. Not much left there either. I didn't answer. She continued going through everything, building a picture in her mind that I could almost see forming behind her eyes. Then she leaned back. Okay, she said. Here's the situation. the situation, like I was one of her clients. You have a high-value property, she continued, gesturing vaguely around the house, but limited liquidity. Your business is stable, but not scalable enough to recover a loss of this size quickly. I swallowed. Am not trying to recover it overnight, I said. That's not the point, Diane replied. The point is risk. You're exposed right now, Mom. One Mo-Re setback and you could lose everything. I'm not trying to recover it overnight, I said. That's not the point, Diane replied. The point is risk. You're exposed right now, Mom. One more setback and you could lose everything. Everything. The word hung in the air between us. I still have control, I said more firmly than before. Nothing is being taken from me. Diane's expression softened, but only slightly. No one is taking anything from you, she said. We're trying to protect what's left. Again, but it felt different now. Less like inclusion. More like ownership. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the table. Jason! I picked it up immediately. Hey, I said, relief slipping into my voice. Are you coming by? There was a hesitation on the other end. Not today, he said. I've got some things to handle. I glanced at Diane, who was watching me closely. Oh, I said. Okay, how's everything going? Jason asked. I almost laughed at the distance in his voice. Your sister's here, I said. We're going over things. Good, he replied quickly. She knows what she's doing. The words landed heavier than he probably intended. She knows what she's doing. And me? What did that make me? I'll talk to you later, Mom, he added. Of course, I said, softly. The call ended. I placed the phone down slowly, suddenly aware of how quiet the room had become. Diane didn't say anything for a moment. Then she spoke again, her tone even more decisive now. We need to consider selling the house. The sentence hit me like a physical force. No, I said immediately. She didn't react to my tone. It's your biggest asset, she continued. It could stabilize your position, give you breathing room, maybe even allow you to reinvest smarter this time. This is my home, I said, my voice tightening. And it's also equity, Diane replied calmly. I stared at her. At my daughter, the same girl who used to run down these hallways laughing, leaving toys in places I would trip over. Now she was looking at the walls, the floors, the space we shared for decades. The same girl who used to run down these hallways laughing, leaving toys in places I would trip over. Now she was looking at the walls, the floors, the space we shared for decades, and seeing numbers. Just numbers. I'm not selling, I said again, more firmly. Diane's jaw tightened slightly. We're not making emotional decisions right now, she said. I repeated. That finally made her pause. Yes, she said after a moment. I felt something shift again stronger this time. Not just distance, not just discomfort, but the first clear edge of something I hadn't wanted to name. This is still my decision, I said quietly. Diane held my gaze. For now, she said. The words were soft, but they carried something underneath them that made my chest tighten. A warning, or maybe a plan. Later that afternoon, after she left, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the same walls she had just evaluated like a listing. I replayed every word, every tone, every look. And for the first time, I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit before. This wasn't just about money. Something had shifted in how my children had shifted in how my children saw me. Not as their mother, not as the person who had built this life, but as someone who had failed, someone who could no longer be trusted to hold control. And as I sat there in the quiet, I began to wonder me, not as their mother, not as the person who had built this life, but as someone who had failed, someone who could no longer be trusted to hold control. And as I sat there in the quiet, I began to wonder, how far would they go if they truly believed I had nothing left? I didn't expect to hear it. Not like that. Not so casually. It was 3 days after Diane's visit. 3 days of silence from Jason, and 3 days of Diane sending short, efficient messages, lists of things I should organize people, I should contact decisions, I should prepare for. Everything had become instructions. That afternoon, I had gone upstairs to look for an old folder Robert used to keep. I told myself I needed it for practical reasons, but in truth, I think I was just searching for something that still felt like him, something that reminded me I wasn't alone in this. That's when I heard Diane's voice. At first I thought she was on the phone again. She had let herself in, she still had a key, and I assumed she was downstairs handling something without telling me. But then I heard Jason, and something in the tone of their voices made me stop. I stood at the top of the stairs, completely still, my hand resting lightly on the railing as I listened. "She can't stay here alone," Diane was saying. There was no softness in her voice this time, no careful phrasing, just certainty. Jason sighed. "I know," he replied, "but this is a lot, Diane. We should at least talk to her first." "Talk to me." I almost stepped forward then, almost announced myself, but something held me back. Diane let out a quiet, impatient breath. "And say what she asked. That she's made a series of bad decisions, lost most of her savings, and now we're worried she'll make things worse." "That's not..." Jason started. "It is exactly that," Diane cut in. "Jason, this isn't about hurting her feelings. This is about protecting what's left." The same phrase again. Protecting what's left. But this time, it sounded colder. More final. Jason didn't answer right away. And in that silence, I felt my heart begin to pound harder. Something instinctive telling me that whatever came next, I wasn't ready for it. Then Diane said it. "We need to start looking at assisted living options." The words didn't register at first. Assisted living. For a second, I thought she meant someone else, a distant relative, a client. But then Jason spoke. "You mean a nursing home." Nursing home. There it was. Clear, unmistakable. "Yes," Diane said. "A good one. Somewhere she'll be safe, supervised, and not making financial decisions on her own." I felt the world tilt slightly beneath my feet. Not physically, but something inside me shifted in a way that made everything else feel unreal. "I don't know," Jason said slowly. "That feels extreme." "Does it?" Diane replied. "Because from where I'm standing, it feels responsible." Responsible. I pressed my hand harder against the railing, grounding myself, forcing myself not to make a sound. "She's not incapable," Jason continued, though there was uncertainty in his voice now. "She just made a bad investment that wiped out most of her savings," Diane said sharply. "What happens next time? What happens if she refuses to sell the house? If she runs the business into the ground, trying to fix things?" I closed my eyes. Each word felt like a quiet incision. Precise. Calculated. "She's our mother," Jason said, but it sounded weaker now. "And that's exactly why we have to step in," Diane replied, "because she won't see this clearly." There was a pause. Then Diane's voice softened slightly. not with warmth, but with persuasion. "Look, we don't have to tell her everything at once," she said. "We can ease into it, say it's temporary, say it's just until things stabilize." Temporary. As if my life could be packaged into something temporary. Jason exhaled slowly. I don't want her to feel like we're taking over," he admitted, taking over. I almost laughed, a hollow, silent sound that never left my chest. Diane didn't hesitate. "She already lost control, Jason," she said. "We're just dealing with the consequences." Lost control. The phrase echoed in my mind louder than everything else. Not, she made a mistake, not, she needs help, but she lost control. And in that moment, something became painfully clear to me. This wasn't just concern. This wasn't just fear. This was a shift in power. A quiet, deliberate redefinition of who I was in their eyes. I wasn't the mother who raised them. I wasn't the woman who built a life from nothing after losing her husband. I was a liability, a problem to be managed, a decision to be made. I stayed there for a long time after their conversation ended, long enough for them to move on to other topics, long enough for the initial shock to settle into something deeper, something colder. When I finally walked down the stairs, I made sure my footsteps were steady, measured, as if I had heard nothing at all. Diane looked up first. "Oh, you're here," she said, as if I had just entered the house. Jason gave me a small, uneasy smile. "Hey, Mom." "Hi," I replied, matching their tone, my voice calm, in a way that surprised even me. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Diane asked. "Yes," I said. I didn't mention what I had actually found because it wasn't in a folder. It was in their voices, in their words, in the way they had spoken about me when they thought I wasn't listening. And that was something I couldn't unhear. For the rest of that afternoon, I played my part. I nodded when Diane spoke. I answered when Jason asked simple questions. I smiled when it was expected, but inside, something fundamental had changed. The hurt was still there. Deep, sharp, undeniable. But layered beneath it now was something new. Clarity. A quiet understanding that whatever I had believed about my children, whatever version of them I had held on to for years, was no longer real. That night after they left, I sat alone in the living room again. The same room, the same walls, but everything felt different now. Because now I knew. They weren't just trying to help me. They were preparing to remove me. And the most painful part wasn't the plan itself. It was how easily they had discussed it, how reasonable it had sounded to them. I leaned back slowly, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts moving in a direction I hadn't fully allowed before. If they truly believed I had nothing left, if they thought I was weak, incapable, finished, then maybe, just maybe, it was time to let them keep believing that, at least for now. That night, after the house finally fell silent, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the drawer beside my bed. It wasn't locked. It never had been. But somehow, it had always felt sealed. Like opening it meant stepping into a part of my life I had chosen not to revisit. Inside, beneath a stack of old letters and faded photographs, was a small envelope, plain, unmarked. I picked it up slowly, my fingers brushing against the paper as if it might disappear if I moved too quickly. For a moment, I just held it there. And then, without thinking too much about it, I opened it. Inside was a single document. A bank statement. Not from my usual account. Not from the one Diane had carefully examined page by page, calculating its decline like it was a failing investment. This one was different. I sat down on the edge of my bed, unfolding the paper fully, my eyes moving across the familiar lines. Account number, balance, transaction history. And there it was, untouched, stable, safe. The second account, Robert's account. No, my account. I hadn't looked at it in years. Not really. Not in a way that made it real. Because, for a long time, I didn't feel like I needed to. After Robert passed, I had continued adding to it quietly. Small amounts at first. Then, over time, more deliberately. Not because I was afraid, but because something in me remembered the way he had looked at me that night at the kitchen table. Serious. Certain. Always keep something safe, even from those you love. Back then, I had thought it was excessive, a little paranoid even. Now I understood. I let out a slow breath, realizing I had been holding it for longer than I thought. The number on that page wasn't just reassuring. It was liberating. Because while Diane and Jason believed I had lost almost everything, they were wrong. I hadn't lost everything, not even close. I leaned back slightly, the paper still in my hands, and for the first time since the investment collapsed, I felt something shift inside me. Not panic, not fear, but control. Real control. The kind that doesn't come from convincing others you're strong, but from knowing quietly that you are. I thought about the conversation I had overheard earlier that day. The nursing home. The way Diane had spoken about me. The way Jason had hesitated but not stopped her. And something inside me settled into place. A decision. Because now everything looked different. Before I had been reacting, trying to explain, trying to hold on to the version of my children I believed in. But now I could see clearly. They weren't responding to me as I was. They were responding to what they believed I had become. Weak, careless, dependent. And as painful as that realization was, it gave me something I hadn't had before. An advantage. I folded the statement carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Then I returned it to the drawer. Not hidden, not locked, but protected in a way that didn't require barriers. Because the truth was, no one was looking for it. Why would they? They had already decided what I had, and more importantly, what I didn't. I stood up slowly and walked over to the mirror across the room. For a moment, I just looked at myself, really looked. At the lines around my eyes, at the way my shoulders had tightened over the past few days, at the quiet exhaustion that had settled into my posture. But beneath all of that, there was something else now. Something steadier, stronger. I wasn't the woman they thought I was, and maybe it was time to let them keep believing that, at least for now. The next morning, I moved through my routine as usual. Coffee, breakfast, a short walk past the shop before opening. Everything looked the same on the outside. But inside, something had changed. Every interaction felt different, sharper, more revealing. When Diane called later that day, I answered calmly. "I've been thinking." she said, getting straight to the point as always. We should meet again this week. There are still some decisions we need to finalize. Decisions? I almost smiled. That sounds fine, I replied. There was a pause on her end, as if she hadn't expected such an easy response. Good, she said. I'll set something up. Jason texted me later that afternoon. Hey, Mom, just checking in. You okay? I stared at the message for a moment. Simple, casual, careful. I'm fine, I replied. And I was. In a way, I hadn't been just a few days ago. Not because the situation had improved, but because I had stopped seeing it the way they wanted me to. That evening, I sat in the living room again, the same space where everything had begun to unravel. Only now, I wasn't replaying their words with confusion. I was analyzing them, understanding them, seeing the patterns I had ignored before. Diane's urgency, Jason's silence, the way both of them had gradually shifted from concern to control. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I hadn't allowed before. Not why are they doing this, but what would they do if they thought I had nothing left at all? The answer came to me slowly, but clearly. They would take over. Completely. The house, the decisions, my life. And they would justify it. Every step of the way. Because in their minds, it would be the responsible thing to do. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. A quiet calm settling over me. If that was what they believed, then maybe I should let them continue. Just long enough to see how far they were willing to go. Because now, I wasn't just a mother trying to hold her family together. I was something else entirely. An observer, a witness, and if necessary, the one who would decide how this story truly ends. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes when you stop reacting, when you stop trying to explain yourself, when you stop hoping people will suddenly become who you thought they were. Instead, you just watch. That's what I started doing. I watched everything. The way Diane spoke to me, the way Jason avoided me, the way decisions were being made not with me, but around me. And the more I watched, the more I understood. It began with small things. Diane stopped asking questions. She gave instructions. Mom, you need to gather your tax records. Mom, don't make any large purchases right now. Mom, I spoke to someone about property evaluation. We should schedule that soon. Each sentence sounded reasonable on the surface, helpful even, but the tone had changed. There was no softness anymore, no space for discussion. It wasn't a conversation, it was direction. And I let it happen. I nodded. I agreed. I played the role she had already written for me, because now I needed to see how far she would go. Jason was harder to read, or maybe easier, because his absence spoke louder than anything he could have said. He didn't come by anymore. He didn't sit with me in the kitchen or ask about the shop. Instead, I got short messages. Busy today. Talk later. Hope you're okay. They sounded polite, but distant, careful. As if he was trying not to get too close to something uncomfortable. Or someone. I stopped reaching out, not out of anger, but out of understanding. Because the truth was, I didn't need reassurance anymore. I needed truth. And truth doesn't always come from what people say. It comes from what they do when they think you're no longer in control. A week passed like that, then another, and slowly the pattern became undeniable. Diane had begun to position herself as the decision maker, not openly, not officially, but practically. She spoke to people on my behalf. She gathered information I hadn't asked for. She referenced our plan and conversations I had never agreed to. And each time, I said very little. Not because I agreed, but because I was learning. One afternoon, she came by again. This time, without calling first. She walked into the house with the same confidence she used to have as a teenager, only now it wasn't youthful energy. It was authority. "I've been looking at some options," she said, placing a folder on the table. "Options?" I sat down across from her, folding my hands in my lap. "What kind of options?" I asked calmly. She opened the folder and turned it toward me. "Listings, not for houses to buy, but for places to live. Smaller homes, condos, apartments." "I think it's time to start thinking realistically," she said. "This house is too much for you now." "Too much for you?" "Not too much for us. For you." "I've lived here for over 30 years, I replied quietly. "And things have changed," she said, not unkindly, but firmly. "We have to adjust to that." "We." Again, that word. I looked down at the pages, not really seeing them. Just shapes, prices, spaces that weren't mine. "And the shop?" I asked. Diane hesitated just for a second. "It might not be sustainable long term," she admitted. "We should consider what to do with it before it becomes a liability." A liability. There it was again. That shift in language. From life to asset. From memory to risk. I nodded slowly, as if I were processing her suggestions. In truth, I was observing something much more important. How easily she said it. How natural it felt to her. This wasn't a sudden reaction. This was a mindset, one that had been forming for a long time. Jason arrived later that day, unexpected. He stood in the doorway for a moment, as if unsure whether to step fully inside. "Hey," he said. "Hi," I replied, offering a small smile. Diane glanced at him. "Good," she said. "You're here. We need to talk about next steps." Next steps, as if I were no longer part of the present. Jason sat down, slow part of the present. Jason sat down slow, his eyes moving between us. "What's going on?" he asked. Diane didn't hesitate. "I'm working on stabilizing Mom's situation," she said. "We need to make some decisions about the house and the business." His eyes moving between us. "What's going on?" he asked. Diane didn't hesitate. "I'm working on stabilizing Mom's situation," she said. "We need to make some decisions about the house and the business." Jason nodded, though his expression was uneasy. "Okay," he said. "But we should make sure Mom's comfortable with everything." I watched Diane closely. There it was, a flicker of impatience. "We don't have time to delay every decision," she replied. "This is about being proactive." Jason looked at me then, not directly, but briefly, as if checking something, looking for a reaction, for resistance, for something. But I gave him nothing, just calm, just stillness, because now I understood something he didn't. Silence can be more powerful than confrontation. It forces people to reveal themselves, and they were revealing everything. That evening after they left, I sat alone again. The same routine, the same room. But now the pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just concern. It wasn't just fear. It was assumption. They had assumed I was finished. And based on that assumption, they had begun to rewrite my life. Without asking, without waiting, without questioning whether they had the right. I leaned back slowly, closing my eyes for a moment. Not in exhaustion, but in focus. Because now I had everything I needed. Not answers, but evidence of who they had become when they believed I had nothing left. And the more I saw, the more certain I became of one thing. I wasn't going to stop them. Not yet. Because they hadn't reached the limit. Not even close. And when they did, when they finally showed me exactly how far they were willing to go, that's when I would decide what to do next. It didn't take long for the cracks between them to appear. At first, it was subtle, a hesitation, a disagreement that didn't quite turn into an argument. But tension has a way of growing, especially when it's built on something unstable. And in our case, that instability wasn't just money, it was power. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Diane had come over again this time with a level of urgency that felt sharper than before. She didn't sit down right away. Instead, she paced slightly, her phone in her hand, her mind clearly moving faster than the room could keep up with. Jason arrived a few minutes later. He looked tired, not physically, but emotionally, like someone who had been thinking too much and sleeping too little. "Okay," Diane said as soon as he stepped in. "Good. We need to finalize some things." "Finalize." The word echoed in the room. Jason frowned. Finalize what Diane stopped pacing and turned toward him. "The house," she said, "and Mom's next living situation." There it was. No softness, no gradual approach. Just decision. Jason glanced at me briefly before looking back at her. "We talked about this," he said. "We said we'd take it slow." "We don't have time to take it slow," Diane replied immediately. "Every day we wait, the situation gets worse." "It's not that simple," Jason said. "It is that simple," Diane shot back. "You're just avoiding it." The room went quiet for a moment. I sat in my chair still and silent, watching them, observing. Because this was new. Jason rarely pushed back, but something in his posture had changed. "I'm not avoiding it," he said more firmly. "I just don't think we should be making decisions for her without her actually agreeing." Diane's eyes narrowed slightly. "She's not in a position to make the best decisions right now," she said. Jason shook his head. "That's not fair. It's realistic," Diane corrected. I could feel the tension tightening between them now, like a wire being pulled too far. "And what happens?" Jason continued, "If we push too hard. If she feels like we're taking everything away from her." Diane didn't hesitate. "We're not taking anything," she said. "We're managing it." Managing. Another word that replaced something more human, more personal. Jason looked frustrated now. "She's still our mother, Diane." "And I'm acting like it," Diane replied sharply. "Are you?" The question landed heavier than she intended. Or maybe exactly as she intended. Jason's expression shifted. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. "It means you're sitting there talking about feelings while I'm the one actually doing something," she said. "I'm the one making calls, reviewing options, trying to pre-calls, reviewing options, trying to prevent things from getting worse." And I appreciate that, Jason said, his voice rising slightly. "But that doesn't give you the right to just take over her life." "I'm not taking over vent things from getting worse." And I appreciate that, Jason said, his voice rising slightly. "But that doesn't give you the right to just take over her life." "I'm not taking over," Diane insisted. "I'm stepping in where she failed." The word hung in the air. Failed. I felt it. Not like before, not like a wound, but like confirmation. Jason reacted immediately. "That's not okay," he said. "You don't get to talk about her like that." "Why not?" Diane challenged. "It's the truth." "No, it's your version of the truth," Jason shot back. "You're acting like she's incapable, like she can't think for herself." She made a decision that cost her almost everything. Diane said, her voice tightening. How much more proof do you need that doesn't erase everything else she's done? Jason replied. For a moment, there was something in his voice. Something real. Respect. Memory. But it didn't last. Because Diane stepped closer, lowering her voice slightly. This isn't about the past, she said. It's about what happens next. Jason hesitated. And in that hesitation, I saw it again. The same pattern, the same weakness. He knew something wasn't right, but he didn't know how to stand against it, and Diane knew that. You think I want to do this? She continued, her tone shifting into something more controlled, more persuasive. You think I enjoy making these decisions? Jason didn't answer. Someone has to, she said. Because if we don't, she's going to lose everything. Everything. The same word. The same assumption. And it was built on something completely false. But they didn't know that. Not yet. Jason ran a hand through his hair, clearly overwhelmed. He started, then stopped. I don't want her to feel like she's being pushed out. Diane softened her expression slightly. She won't, she said, if we handle it the right way, and there it was. The strategy, not whether to do it, but how to make it acceptable. How? Jason asked quietly. Diane glanced at me briefly, just for a second, then looked back at him. We present it as support, she said. Temporary changes, a safer environment, less stress. Less stress. I almost smiled, because the irony of that statement was almost unbearable. Jason nodded slowly, not fully convinced, but not resisting either. And that was enough. It always had been. Okay, he said finally, but we need to be careful. We will be, Diane replied. The conversation shifted after that. Details, timelines, possibilities. But the decision had already been made, at least in their minds. And as I sat there listening, watching, understanding every layer of what was unfolding, I realized something important. This wasn't just about Diane being controlling, or Jason being passive. It was about something deeper. Diane believed she was right, completely. She believed she was protecting the family, making the hard choices no one else could make. And Jason. He believed she might be right. Just enough to follow her. Just enough to stay quiet when it mattered most. That combination was dangerous. Not because they were trying to hurt me, but because they believed they weren't. That night after they left, I sat in the same chair again. The same silence. The same house they were already planning to take from me. But now, the picture was complete. I understood them, both of them, not as my children, but as people. People who had made a decision about who I was without ever asking me. And the most important part, they still thought they were in control. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands together, a calm certainty settling deep inside me. They weren't. Not really. Because the one thing they hadn't considered, the one thing they hadn't even looked for, was the one thing that changed everything. And when the time came, when I finally decided to show them, it wouldn't just be about money. It would be about truth. The shift from planning to action happened faster than I expected. Up until that point, everything Diane had done could still be explained away. Concern. Preparation. Responsibility. But there is a line, an invisible one, between helping someone and taking control of their life. And one morning, without asking, without warning, she crossed it. It started with a phone call. Not from Diane, from my bank. Mrs. Emerson, the woman on the line, said politely, We just wanted to confirm a recent request regarding your account authorization. I froze. My what? I asked. Authorization, she repeated. We received documentation granting limited financial access to a secondary party, Diane Emerson. For a moment, I didn't speak. The words didn't just surprise me. They rearranged something inside my mind. I didn't authorize anything, I said slowly. There was a pause on the other end. Oh, the woman replied carefully. We were under the impression this had been discussed with you. Discussed. I almost smiled, because suddenly everything made sense. I'd like you to send me a copy of whatever you received. I said, my voice calm. Too calm. Of course, she said. We'll email it right away. When the call ended, I didn't move. I just sat there, the silence in the room thick and heavy, waiting for the confirmation of something I already knew. The email came within minutes. I opened it, and there it was. My name, my account, and Diane's name listed as someone with limited access rights. There was a signature at the bottom. Mine, or at least something that looked like it. But I hadn't signed it. I knew that. I knew every detail of my own handwriting. This was close, convincing even, but not real. I leaned back slowly in my chair, staring at the screen. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something different. Not hurt, not disappointment, but something colder, something sharper. Betrayal stripped of emotion, because this wasn't just assumption anymore. This wasn't just control disguised as concern. This was action, deliberate, calculated, and done without my consent. I closed the laptop gently, not out of denial, but because I didn't need to see it again. I already understood. Diane wasn't waiting for my agreement anymore. She was moving forward as if it didn't matter. And Jason, I wondered if he knew, if he had agreed to it, or if this was something Diane had done on her own. But the answer didn't change the outcome. Because either way, I had just become someone whose signature could be replaced, whose authority could be rewritten, whose life could be redirected, without even being asked. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, everything looked the same. Cars passing, neighbors going about their day. The world moving forward, unaware of the quiet shift happening inside my own home. And in that moment, I made another decision. Not emotional, not reactive, strategic. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Because confronting her now would only push her to hide it better, to move faster, to justify it even more. No, I needed her to keep going, to show me everything, every step, every decision, every line she was willing to cross. That afternoon, Diane came over again, as if nothing had happened, as if the morning hadn't revealed something that changed everything. Mom, she said, walking in, placing her bag on the table. I made some progress today. Of course she had. I turned toward her, my expression calm. What kind of progress? I asked. She smiled slightly, just enough to suggest confidence. I've started putting some safeguards in place, she said, just to make sure everything is handled properly. Safeguards. I nodded. That sounds helpful, I replied. She studied my face for a moment, looking for resistance, for suspicion, for something. But I gave her nothing, just quiet agreement, because now I understood something she didn't. The most dangerous thing she could do was believe I trusted her. Jason arrived shortly after. He looked at Diane, then at me, then back at Diane. Something in his expression told me he knew something had changed. What's going on? He asked. Diane didn't hesitate. I'm just making sure Mom's finances are protected, she said. Jason frowned slightly. How? By organizing things, she replied. Setting up access where necessary, making sure nothing slips through the cracks. Access. It was. Jason looked at me. Did you? By organizing things? She replied. Setting up access where necessary, making sure nothing slips through the cracks. Access. There it was. Jason looked at me. Did you talk about this? He asked. I met his eyes, and for a moment I saw it again. That flicker of doubt, that hesitation, the part of him that still questioned things. Yes, I said calmly. The words settled into the room like a quiet lie, but it wasn't a lie for them. It was a decision. Jason nodded slowly. Okay, he said. And just like that, whatever doubt he had disappeared. Not because it was resolved, but because I had removed the reason to question it. Diane relaxed slightly, her confidence returning. Good, she said. Then we can move forward. Move forward. I watched them both carefully, not as their mother, not anymore, but as someone who finally understood the situation completely. Diane believed she was in control. Jason believed things were being handled, and both of them believed I had agreed. That was their biggest mistake, because while they were moving forward with their plan, they had no idea I was already several steps ahead. That night, I opened the drawer again. The envelope was still there, untouched, safe. I held it for a moment, feeling the weight of what it represented. Not just money, but truth and power. I placed it back, gently closing the drawer with quiet certainty. Because now the path was clear. I wasn't going to stop them. Not yet. Because they hadn't reached the point where the truth would matter most. But they would, soon, and when they did, everything they believed about me, everything they had assumed, everything they had built their decisions on, would collapse. Just like the investment they thought had destroyed me. Only this time, they wouldn't be prepared for it. I didn't raise my voice. That was the first thing that unsettled them. Because when people expect resistance, they prepare for noise. They prepare for emotion, for arguments, for tears. But I gave them none of that. I chose a Sunday, late afternoon, the kind of quiet hour when people assume nothing serious is about to happen. I called them both over. Just dinner, I said. Simple. Familiar. Safe. Diane arrived first as usual. Precise. Controlled. Already scanning the room like she was walking into a situation she needed to manage. Jason came a few minutes later. Slower. More hesitant. His eyes moved around the house before settling on me as if he were trying to read something he didn't quite understand. We sat down together. The same table, the same chairs. But this time, everything was different. Dinner was quiet at first. Small talk, polite questions, surface-level conversation that barely touched anything real. And I let it continue just long enough. Then I set my fork down. Gently. Deliberately. And I looked at them. I spoke to the bank, I said. That was all it took. Diane froze, just for a second. Jason looked up immediately. The bank, he asked. Yes, I replied calmly. They called me about a document I apparently signed. Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Diane recovered quickly. Of course she did. It was just a precaution, she said smoothly. A limited authorization so I could help manage things if needed. I nodded slowly. I see. Jason looked between us. Wait, what document, he asked? Diane didn't look at him. It's not a big deal, she said. Just a standard form. Did Mom agree to it? Jason pressed. Diane hesitated. Only for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Yes, she said. Another lie. Clean, confident, and completely unnecessary. I leaned back slightly in my chair. No, I said. Just one word, but it landed harder than anything else. Jason's head turned toward me. What do you mean, he asked. I mean, I continued, my voice steady. I didn't sign anything. Now Diane looked at me. Really looked. Not as someone she was managing, but as someone who had just stepped outside the role she had assigned me. It must have been a misunderstanding, she said carefully. No, I replied. It wasn't. The air in the room shifted. No more pretense. No more polite distance. Just truth beginning to surface. Jason leaned forward. Diane, he said, his voice tightening. What did you do? Diane exhaled slowly, her patience thinning. I handled a situation that needed to be handled, she said. That's all. That's not all, Jason replied. You can't just... I can, she interrupted sharply, and I did. Diane exhaled slowly, her patience thinning. I handled a situation that needed to be handled, she said. That's all. That's not all, Jason replied. You can't just... I can, she interrupted sharply. And I did. There it was, not hidden anymore, not softened, just stated. Jason looked stunned. You forged her signature? He asked. Diane didn't answer directly. Instead, she looked at me. You needed protection, she said, and you weren't going to make that decision on your own. Protection. Again. Always that word. I held her gaze. From what? I asked. She didn't hesitate. From making another mistake, she said. The room went completely still, because now everything was out in the open, not just the action, but the belief behind it. Jason stood up suddenly, pushing his chair back. That's not okay, he said. That's not even close to okay. Diane stood as well. You're overreacting, she said. This is exactly why things get out of control, because no one wants to take responsibility. Jason shook his head. This isn't responsibility, he said. This is control. Diane's expression hardened. If control is what keeps things from falling apart, then yes, she said. That's exactly what this is. I watched them both. The argument building, the lines being drawn, and for the first time, I stepped into it. Sit down, I said quietly. They both stopped. Not because I was loud, but because I wasn't. Because something in my voice had changed. Jason sat first. Diane followed more slowly, reluctantly. I folded my hands in front of me, looking at both of them. For weeks, I said, I've listened to you talk about my life as if I wasn't part of it. Neither of them spoke. You've made plans, I continued, decisions, arrangements, still silence, and all of it, I added, based on what you think I've lost. Diane opened her mouth to respond, but I raised my hand slightly, not aggressively, just enough, and she stopped. I understand why you're concerned, I said. I understand why you think you need to step in. I looked at Jason, then back at Diane. But what I don't understand, I continued, my voice tightening just slightly, is how you decided I no longer had a say. Jason looked down. Diane held her ground. Because you proved it, she said. The words were sharp, final. You made a decision that cost you everything, she continued. That changes things. Everything. That word again. The foundation of all their actions. I let a small pause settle into the room, long enough for it to matter. Then I leaned forward slightly. No, I said quietly. It doesn't. Diane frowned. Yes, it does, she insisted. You don't get to just ignore I didn't lose everything I interrupted. The sentence cut through the room like a blade. Clean, precise, unexpected. Both of them froze. What? Jason asked. Diane's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? She said. And for the first time, I allowed a small shift in my expression. Not anger, not satisfaction, just certainty. I mean, I said slowly, you've both made a lot of decisions based on something that isn't true. The silence that followed was different, heavier. Because now the ground beneath them was starting to move, but I didn't say more. Not yet. Because this moment, this exact moment, was where everything began to change. The silence after my words lingered longer than either of them expected. You could feel it in the air. That subtle shift when certainty begins to crack and something unfamiliar starts to take its place. Doubt. Jason was the first to react. What do you mean you didn't lose everything? He asked. His voice cautious now, like he wasn't sure what answer he was about to receive. Diane didn't speak. She was watching me, closely, carefully. The way someone watches a situation they thought they understood begin to unravel. I didn't rush. I had learned something over the past few weeks. Timing matters more than truth, and this moment needed to land exactly where it would change everything. I mean, I said slowly, you both made decisions about my life based on an assumption. Diane leaned forward slightly. It wasn't an assumption, she said. We saw the numbers. Yes, I nodded. You saw one set of numbers. Her eyes narrowed. What is that supposed to mean? I stood up then. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just deliberately. And I walked out of the room. Behind me, I could hear Jason shift in his chair. Mommy called. But I didn't answer, because some things are better shown than explained. I walked down the hallway, into my bedroom, to the same drawer I had opened nights before, the same envelope, the same quiet truth that had been sitting there all along, for years, untouched, unquestioned, protected. I picked it up, feeling its familiar weight in my hand, and for a brief moment I thought about Robert, about the way he had looked at me that night, the seriousness in his voice, the certainty. Always keep something safe, even from those you love. Back then, I didn't understand. Now I did. I walked back into the dining room. They were both standing now, waiting, watching. I placed the envelope on the table between us. Diane's eyes dropped to it immediately. Jason looked at me. What is that? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened it, slowly, carefully, and pulled out the document inside. Then I slid it across the table toward them. Read it, I said. Jason stepped forward first. Diane followed through more cautiously. Jason picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the page. At first, his expression didn't change, just concentration. Then confusion. Then something else. Something sharper. Wait, he murmured. Diane leaned closer. What is it? She asked. He didn't answer immediately, because now he was reading the number and understanding it. That can't be right, he said quietly. Diane took the paper from his hand, and for the first time since all of this began, I saw something I had never seen in her before. She hesitated. Her eyes moved across the page once. Then again. Slower, more carefully, as if the meaning might change if she read it differently. It's real, I said. My voice was calm, steady, certain. Diane looked up at me. What is this? More carefully, as if the meaning might change if she read it differently. It's real, I said. My voice was calm, steady, certain. Diane looked up at me. "What is this?" she asked. Her voice was no longer controlled. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't confident. It was uncertain. "It's an account," I replied. "One you didn't look for." Jason blinked. "A second account?" he asked. I nodded. Yes, the words settled into the room like a final piece of something they had been trying to assemble. "But why?" Jason asked. "Why didn't you tell us?" I held his gaze. "Because you didn't ask," I said. The answer was simple, but it carried weight. Because it was true. Diane's grip on the paper tightened slightly. "How much is in this?" she asked. I didn't respond immediately, not because I didn't want to answer, but because the number itself wasn't the point. "Enough," I said finally. Her eyes flicked back to the page, then to me, then back again, as if she were trying to reconcile two completely different realities at once. "You let us believe," she started, then stopped. Her voice faltered. For the first time, "You let us believe you had lost everything," she said. I tilted my head slightly. "No," I replied. "You decided that on your own." At once, "You let us believe," she started, then stopped. Her voice faltered. For the first time, "You let us believe you had lost everything," she said. I tilted my head slightly. "No," I replied. "You decided that on your own." Silence. Heavy, unavoidable. Jason stepped back slightly, running a hand through his hair. "So all of this," he said, gesturing vaguely between us, "was based on something that wasn't even true." "Yes," I said. Diane shook her head slowly. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "Why wouldn't you say something?" I looked at her, really looked, and for a moment, I saw something different. Not control, not certainty, but discomfort. Because now the situation had changed, and she didn't know how to stand in it. I was waiting. I said, "For what?" Jason asked. "For you," I replied. Neither of them spoke. "For you to talk to me," I continued. "For you to ask me what was really going on. For you to trust that I might still be capable of understanding my own life." Jason looked down. Diane didn't move. But instead, I said quietly, "You made decisions. You made plans. You took control without ever knowing the full truth." Diane's jaw tightened. "We were trying to help," she said. "I know," I replied, "and I meant it." That was the complicated part. "I know you believed that," I added. The distinction hung in the air. Belief versus reality. Jason exhaled slowly. "So what does this mean now?" he asked. I looked at both of them, at my children, standing in front of me, no longer certain of anything they had built over the past few weeks. "It means," I said, "that I'm not who you thought I was." I paused, letting that settle. "And it means," I continued, my voice firm, "now that the decisions you've been making were never yours to make." Diane's eyes flashed slightly. "Make?" Diane's eyes flashed slightly. "Hen, why didn't you stop us?" she asked. There it was, the question that revealed everything. Not regret, not apology, but confusion. I held her gaze. "Because I needed to see how far you would go," I said. "And in that moment, Hen, why didn't you stop us?" she asked. There it was, the question that revealed everything. Not regret, not apology, but confusion. I held her gaze. "Because I needed to see how far you would go," I said. And in that moment, everything changed. Because now it wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about control. It was about truth, and the truth had finally been revealed. No one spoke for a long time after that. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because too much had already been revealed. The room felt different now. Not tense in the same way as before, but heavier, as if something invisible had collapsed between us. Jason sat down slowly, his movements almost uncertain, like he wasn't fully aware of where he was or what had just happened. He looked at the paper again, then at me, then back at the table. "I don't understand," he said quietly. And for the first time in all of this, his voice didn't carry doubt. It carried something else. Regret. Diane, on the other hand, hadn't moved. She was still standing, the document in her hand, her posture rigid. But the confidence that once held her together was gone, replaced by something more fragile. Not guilt, not yet, but something close to loss of control. "You should have told us," she said finally. Her voice was lower now, not sharp, not commanding, just strained. I looked at her. "I gave you every chance to ask," I replied. "That's not the same thing," she said quickly. "We were trying to figure things out based on what we had." "What you assumed you had," I corrected gently. That distinction hit her harder than I expected, because now it wasn't just about what she did. It was about why she did it, and for the first time, she didn't have a clear answer. Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his hands pressed together as if trying to hold on to something slipping away. "I should have asked you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond right away, because this moment mattered more than the confrontation, more than the reveal. This was where truth turned into understanding. I kept thinking, he continued, his eyes still on the table, that something didn't feel right. I watched him carefully. "And I ignored it," he added. The honesty in his voice wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was real, and real things don't need volume. Diane exhaled sharply. "This isn't fair," she said suddenly. The words cut through the quiet. Jason looked up. "What isn't fair?" he asked. Diane turned toward him, frustration returning, but this time it was different. Less controlled, more reactive. "She let us believe something that wasn't true," she said. "She watched us make decisions, big decisions, without correcting us." I held her gaze. "Yes," I said. No denial, no hesitation. And that seemed to frustrate her even more. Why she demanded. There it was again, the question she couldn't let go of, because the answer would define everything. I took a slow breath. Because I needed to understand something I said. Understand what she pressed. I looked at both of them, not as my children, but as people who had revealed themselves. "How far you would go," I said. The words settled heavily between us. Jason leaned back, his expression tightening. Diane shook her head. "That's not fair," she repeated. "You were testing us." "No," I replied calmly. "You were showing me who you are." Silence again, but this time it felt sharper, more direct, because now there was no confusion, only truth. Jason stood up slowly and walked a few steps away, running his hands through his hair. "I can't believe I went along with this," he said. "You didn't go along," Diane snapped. "You agreed with me. I didn't agree with everything," Jason shot back. "You didn't stop anything either," she replied. And there it was, the shift, not just between them, but within them. Jason turned toward her, his frustration finally rising to the surface. "I trusted you," he said. "I thought you were doing what was best." "I was," Diane insisted. "You forged her signature," he said. The sentence landed harder this time, because now it wasn't just an accusation, it was fact. Diane didn't respond immediately, and in that silence, something broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. Inside her. "I did what needed to be done," she said finally, but the conviction in her voice was weaker now, less certain. Jason shook his head. "No," he said. "You did what you decided was right without asking anyone else." Diane's eyes flicked toward me, then back to him. "And what would you have done?" she asked. "Nothing." "No," he said. "You did what you decided was right without asking anyone else." Diane's eyes flicked toward me, then back to him. "And what would you have done?" she asked. "Nothing." Jason hesitated, and for a moment the old pattern returned. Uncertainty, but only for a moment. "I would have talked to her," he said. The simplicity of that answer cut deeper than any argument. Diane looked away, because now there was no way to defend against that. The room fell quiet again, but this silence was different. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't tension. It was realization. Jason turned back to me slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. Just 2 words, but they carried everything he hadn't said before. I studied his face, the sincerity, the regret, the understanding that had finally caught up with him. "I know," I said. And I meant that too. Because unlike Diane, Jason hadn't acted out of control. He had acted out of hesitation, and hesitation can be corrected. Diane, however, remained still, unmoving. Her grip on the paper had loosened slightly, but she hadn't let go. Not yet. Because for her, this wasn't just about being wrong. It was about losing something she had held onto tightly. Control. "I was trying to protect you," she said quietly. This time, there was no edge in her voice, no sharpness, just something softer, something closer to the truth she hadn't fully faced yet. I looked at her. "I believe that," I said, and again, it was true. That was what made all of this so complicated. No one here thought they were the villain. But that didn't change what had happened. Diane swallowed slightly, her eyes dropping to the table. "Then why does it feel like I'm the one who did something wrong?" she asked. The question wasn't defensive. It was searching. I took a slow breath. "Because you didn't trust me," I said. The answer was simple, but it landed exactly where it needed to. Diane didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. And for the first time since all of this began, the power in the room had shifted completely. Not through anger, not through force, but through truth. And truth, once revealed, doesn't go away. The room stayed quiet long after the truth had settled, not because we were finished, but because we had finally reached the part where something had to change. You can't go back once you see people clearly. And they couldn't unsee me now. Not the version of me they had imagined, but the one sitting right in front of them, calm, certain, no longer waiting. I stood up slowly, not to leave, but to move, to shift the space in a way that made it clear this wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was a decision. "I'm not selling the house," I said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Finality. Diane looked up immediately. What? She said. I'm not selling the house, I repeated, and I'm not closing the shop. Her expression tightened again, but this time it wasn't control. It was resistance. You can't be serious, she said. After everything that's happened. I am completely serious, I interrupted. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Jason stayed quiet, watching carefully. Because he understood now, this wasn't about negotiation. I've taken care of this home for over 30 years, I continued. I built that shop from nothing, and I'm not going to walk away from either of them because of a decision you thought I made. Diane stood up again, frustration returning, but now it was unstable, less grounded. You're making a mistake, she said. You're being emotional. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. That shift, from control to dismissal. No, I said calmly. I'm being clear. Jason exhaled slowly. Diane, he started, but she didn't let him finish. We just went through all of this, she said. You saw what could have happened. I nodded. Yes, I said. I saw what you were willing to do. The words landed harder than she expected, because now the focus had shifted, not on risk, but on behavior. That's not fair, she said again, but weaker this time. It's honest, I replied. Silence. Then I continued. I'm not angry, I said. Not in the way you think. They both looked at me, because anger, they understood. It's loud, predictable, easy to respond to. But this was different. I'm disappointed, I said. That word carries more weight than anger ever could. Diane looked away. Jason swallowed slightly. But I'm also clear, I added. I walked a few steps closer to the table, resting my hands lightly against the back of a chair. Clear about what I want, I said. Clear about what I'm willing to accept. Clear about what changes from here forward. Jason straightened slightly. What kind of changes, he asked. I looked at him first, then at Diane. Boundaries, I said. The word hung in the air. Firm, unfamiliar, necessary. No one has access to my accounts, I continued. Not now, not later, not unless I decide otherwise. Diane opened her mouth, then closed it again, because now she knew better than to interrupt. No one makes decisions about my home, I added. Or my business. I paused, letting each sentence settle. Not without me, I finished. Jason nodded slowly. That makes sense, he said quietly. Diane didn't respond. Not right away, because this wasn't a situation she could take control of anymore. This was something she had to accept, or lose. And there's something else, I said. They both looked at me again. This doesn't go back to the way it was, I continued. Jason frowned slightly. What do you mean, he asked. I took a slow breath. Trust doesn't reset just because the truth came out, I said. That one hit harder than everything else, because it wasn't about the past. It was about the future. Diane finally spoke. So, what are you saying? She asked. Her voice was quieter now, careful. I'm saying, we rebuild, I replied. But we rebuild differently. Jason leaned forward slightly. How? He asked. I looked at him. With honesty, I said. With respect. With conversation, not assumption. Then I turned to Diane. And with trust, I added. Not control. She held my gaze for a long moment, and in that moment something shifted again. Not fully, not completely, but enough. I thought I was doing the right thing, she said quietly. This time, there was no defense in her voice, no argument, just truth. I know, I said. And that's what makes this harder, I added. Because if she had done it out of cruelty, it would have been easier to walk away. But she hadn't. She had done it out of certainty, and certainty can blind people. I need time, Diane said. The admission was small, but significant, because it meant she was no longer trying to control the outcome. She was trying to understand it. That's fair, I replied. Jason looked between us. And me? He asked. There was something almost childlike in the question. Not immature, but vulnerable. I softened slightly. You start by trusting what you feel, I said, not just what you're told. He nodded, slowly, taking it in, because for him that was the lesson. To speak sooner, to question more, to stand instead of follow. I stepped back slightly, giving the room space again. But this time, it felt different. Lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because everything was finally real. I'm not going anywhere, I said. Not from this house, not from my life, and not from being your mother. My voice softened slightly on that last part, because despite everything, that part hadn't changed. It never would. But from now on, I added, you meet me where I am. Not where they thought I should be, not where they assumed I had fallen, but where I had always been. Standing, steady, waiting for them to see it. And finally, they did. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't arrive with a single apology or a single conversation. It comes slowly, unevenly, in small, almost unnoticeable moments that over time begin to shift something inside you. The days after that dinner felt different. Not fixed, not easy, but honest. And honesty, I learned, is where healing begins. Diane didn't come by the next day, or the day after that. For the first time in weeks, the house was quiet in a way that didn't feel heavy. It felt necessary, like space. Jason, however, reached out. Not with a quick message, not with a casual check-in, but with something more intentional. Can I come by? He asked. Simple, direct. I didn't hesitate. Yes, I replied. He arrived that afternoon, standing at the door for a moment before knocking, something he hadn't done in years. It struck me immediately. That small gesture, respect, or maybe awareness. When I opened the door, he didn't rush inside. He didn't assume. Hi, he said. Hi, I replied. There was a brief pause. Then he stepped in, carefully, like someone entering a space that meant something again. We sat in the kitchen, not the dining room, not the place where everything had shifted, but somewhere simpler, familiar. For a while, we didn't talk about anything important. We talked about the weather, the shop, a customer he remembered from years ago. It felt almost normal, but not quite, because underneath it all, there was something waiting to be said. Eventually, he set his cup down. I've been thinking a lot, he said. I nodded. I figured you might. He looked at me then, directly. I should have trusted you, he said. There was no hesitation this time, no uncertainty, just truth. I should have asked more questions, he continued. I should have spoken up sooner. I watched him carefully, because apologies can be easy, but understanding, that takes something deeper. I knew something didn't feel right. he admitted, but I kept telling myself Diane had a plan, that she knew what she was doing. I let a small pause settle. "And you followed," I said gently. He nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I did." There was no defensiveness in his voice, no excuses, just acknowledgement. "That matters," I said. He frowned slightly. "What does?" he asked. "That you see it now," I replied, "because that's where change begins, not in perfection, but in awareness." Jason leaned back slightly, exhaling. "I don't want to be that person," he said quietly. "You're not," I said. He looked at me. "But I was," he replied. I shook my head slightly. "You made a choice," I said. "That doesn't define who you are forever." He sat with that for a moment, taking it in. Because forgiveness isn't just something we give others. It's something they have to accept for themselves. "I want to do better," he said. And this time, it didn't sound like a promise. It sounded like a decision. I smiled slightly. "Then start small," I said. He nodded. "How?" he asked. "By showing up," I replied. "Not just when things go wrong." That seemed to land, because he understood what I meant. Presence, not control, not solutions, just being there. We talked a little longer after that. Nothing dramatic, nothing heavy, but something had shifted. Something real. When he left, he didn't rush out. He paused at the door. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For not giving up on me," he replied. I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, I hadn't decided that yet. But I also hadn't closed the door. And sometimes, that's enough. Diane took longer. Days passed before I heard from her. When she finally called, her voice was different, quieter, less certain. "Can we talk?" she asked. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I understood something now that I hadn't before. Not every conversation needs to happen immediately. "Yes," I said, "but not today." There was a pause. Then she said, "Okay." And that was new. No pressure, no insistence, just acceptance. When she finally came by a few days later, the energy was completely different. She didn't walk in like she owned the space. She waited, knocked, just like Jason had. When I opened the door, she didn't step forward right away. "Hi, Mom," she said. The word mom sounded softer, less like a role, more like a relationship. "Hi," I replied. We sat in the living room, the same room where everything had begun to fall apart, and now where something else might begin. She didn't start with explanations, or justifications, or plans. She just sat there for a moment. Then she said, "I don't know how to fix this." That was the most honest thing she had said in a long time. I looked at her. "You don't fix it all at once," I said. She nodded slowly. "I thought I was protecting you," she said. "I know," I replied, and I thought. She hesitated. If I didn't take control, everything would fall apart. I let her finish. Because this part mattered. I didn't realize, she added quietly, that I was pushing you out of your own life. There it was, the understanding, not perfect, not complete, but real. I leaned back slightly. "That's the part that matters," I said. She looked at me. "What does she ask?" "That you see it now," I replied. The same answer I had given Jason, because truth doesn't change depending on who hears it. Diane swallowed slightly. "I'm sorry," she said. And for the first time, it didn't sound like something she felt she had to say. It sounded like something she understood. I studied her for a moment. Then I nodded. "Thank you," I said. "Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement." And sometimes that's where healing starts. We didn't solve everything that day. We didn't rewrite the past. But we did something more important. We stopped pretending, and in its place, we started something new. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And real is enough to begin again. Time didn't erase what happened. It softened it. There's a difference. Erasing something means it disappears like it never existed. But softening means it becomes something you can carry without breaking. And that's what happened to us. Not overnight, not in a single conversation in, but in the weeks that followed. Softening means it becomes something you can carry without breaking. And that's what happened to us. Not overnight, not in a single conversation. But in the weeks that followed, something steady began to take shape. Jason started coming by more often. Not to fix things, not to suggest changes, just to be there. Sometimes he'd sit in the kitchen while I worked on paperwork. Sometimes he'd stop by the shop standing quietly near the counter, watching customers come and go like he used to when he was younger. He didn't try to take over. He didn't offer advice unless I asked. And slowly, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not a son trying to solve problems, but a son trying to understand. One afternoon, he picked up a framed photo that had been sitting on the shelf for years. It was an old one. Me, him, Diane, and Robert, all of us standing outside the shop on its opening day. "You never told us how hard this was for you," he said quietly. I walked over, standing beside him. "I didn't think I needed to," I replied. He nodded slowly. "I think I never really saw you," he admitted. That sentence stayed with me. Because sometimes the people closest to us see the least, not out of neglect, but out of assumption. "I'm here now," he added, and this time I believed him. Diane took longer, but when she returned, it wasn't the same person who had walked into my house weeks earlier with plans and control in her hands. It was someone quieter, more careful. The first time she came back to the shop, she didn't say much. She just stood near the doorway, watching, observing, taking in something she had once tried to dismantle. "It's different than I imagined," she said after a while. I glanced at her. "How so?" I asked. She hesitated. "I thought it was smaller," she admitted, "less stable." I smiled faintly. "Appearances can be misleading," I said. She nodded. "I know that now." There was no tension in her voice, no need to prove anything. "Just I thought it was smaller," she admitted, "less stable." I smiled faintly. "Appearances can be misleading," I said. She nodded. "I know that now." There was no tension in her voice, no need to prove anything, just recognition. Over time, she began to ask questions, not to control, not to direct, but to understand. "How did you build this? How did you keep it running all these years? Did you ever feel like giving up?" And I answered, not defensively, not carefully, just honestly, because for the first time, she was actually listening. One evening after closing, we sat together in the shop. The lights dim, the quiet settling in. "This place?" she said softly, looking around. "It's not just a business, is it?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "It never was." She looked at me then, and something in her expression shifted. "I tried to take this away from you," she said. The words weren't heavy. They weren't dramatic. But they were real. Yes, I replied. She swallowed slightly. I'm sorry, she said. And this time, it wasn't about the mistake. It was about the understanding behind it. I nodded. I know, I said. Because I did. And that's what made it possible to move forward. Not perfectly. Not completely. But honestly. The house felt different too. Not because anything had changed physically, but because the weight that once filled it had lifted. Not gone, but lighter, manageable. The conversations became easier, less guarded, more real. We didn't pretend everything was fine. We didn't ignore what had happened, but we didn't live inside it either. We moved around it, through it, beyond it. One morning, as I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, I opened the drawer again. The same drawer. The same envelope. I held it for a moment. The second account. The secret that had changed everything. For years it had represented protection, control, security. But now, it meant something else. Choice. I didn't need to hide it anymore. Not in the same way. Because the real protection wasn't the money. It was the clarity I had gained. The understanding of who I was and who they were, and what we could become together. I placed the envelope back into the drawer, but this time, it didn't feel like I was hiding anything. It felt like I was simply holding on to something that was mine. Later that day, Jason and Diane both came by. Unplanned, uncoordinated, but somehow together. We sat at the table again, the same table where everything had once come apart, and now where something stronger had been rebuilt. Not perfect, but real. Mom, Jason said we were thinking. I raised an eyebrow slightly. That's new, I teased gently. He smiled. Diane let out a small breath, almost a laugh. We wanted to ask you something, she said. Ask, I replied. Jason looked at Diane, then back at me. How can we help? He said. The question was simple, but everything about it was different. Not assumption, not control, just respect. I looked at both of them, at the people they were, and the people they were becoming. You already are, I said. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Because family isn't about control. It's not about who knows more or who decides what's best. It's about showing up, listening, and learning how to stand beside each other instead of over each other. And sometimes it takes losing trust to finally understand how to build it right. Sometimes the hardest truths in life are not about money loss or even betrayal, but about how easily we can stop seeing the people we love for who they really are. In this story, nothing was truly lost except trust, perspective, and connection. And yet those were the things that nearly destroyed everything. We often think love means protecting others, making decisions for them, or stepping in before they fall. But real love is quieter than that. It listens, it asks, it trusts, even when it's uncomfortable. Alice didn't just reveal a second bank account. She revealed something much deeper, the cost of assumption and the power of standing firm in your own life. She reminded us that dignity doesn't disappear just because circumstances change, and that sometimes the people we think need saving are the ones teaching us how to see clearly again. Maybe you've been in a situation like this where someone made decisions for you without asking. Or maybe you've been the one who thought you were helping only to realize later that you were taking control instead of offering support. Either way, the lesson is the same. Respect is not given through control. Trust is not built through assumption. And love is not proven by taking over someone's life. It's proven by standing beside them. So I want to ask you, have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever felt misunderstood or realized too late that you misunderstood someone else? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are many more stories like this, real, emotional, and meaningful, waiting for you here. Wherever you are in the world, and whatever time you are watching this, I'd love to hear from you. You are not alone. And sometimes all it takes is one honest moment to begin again.